Racism is a blight on the human conscience. The idea that any people can be inferior to another to the point where those who consider themselves superior define and treat the rest as subhuman denies the humanity, even of those who elevate themselves to the status of gods. This was spoken on racism by Nelson Mandela in his address to UK's Joint House of Parliament on July 11th, 1996. Got an amazing guest with us today. And we're about to welcome our guest. We are both here on Kaurna country. So before we do, I'd first like to give our acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land in which we're on today. And since we're online, let us all pay respects to all First Nations peoples and our elders, past, present, and future. Without further ado, to our amazing guest. He's a CEO. He's a man of great passion, of great heart, of great community interest. He's someone that I personally am very inspired by in the way that he works. We've got none other than Jason Downs. Jason, how are you today, brother?
Matthew, I'm very well, thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I'm grateful. It's lovely to hear you speak that way. Thank you very much. I'm great. It's a lovely day and it's a pleasure to be here talking to you.
It's so amazing to have you here as a guest, Jason. And I mean it when I say that I'm inspired by what you do, because I met you pretty close to when you started your role. You're the Chief Executive Officer at Reconciliation South Australia. And soon after commencing in your role, I was lucky enough to catch up with you and hear your story and feel your enthusiasm. You started out working in the South Australian government, right? But you've along the way developed a deep level of passion and encouragement and enthusiasm for First Nations peoples, and really in the spirit of reconciliation, you do a lot of amazing work. Can you share a little bit about where your passion for First Nations peoples and reconciliation comes from?
Wow, that's a really easy question to start with, isn't it, Matthew? Where does my
I
passion
was
come
saying it's going
from?
to be easy for you to answer, Jason, before we started recording. Yeah,
You
where does your
did.
passion come
Where
from?
did look? Um, uh, I would have to say, uh, for those that know me, I'm a very much a values orientated person, and I have spent a lot of my years really digging into what that actually means as a human being. And um, I'm 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 pleased and I'm proud to say that I live by my values and I make choices by them a lot.
Mm.
Um, and that's tricky sometimes, but I can go to bed at night very happy with the choices that I have made that have led me to where I am today. So to your question, um, I am very much a person who is curious by nature,
Mm.
and um, I think that has a lot to do with my passion.
Mm.
And the thing that I guess drives me is wanting to learn more, wanting to know more, wanting to understand more. And how lucky am I to be living in a country at a time when um, we have a 65,000-year-old continuous culture to learn from, to do better from, and to understand how to live and work in an environment that we do. So it's a curious passion that's driven me to where I am today.
And I really appreciate when you mention your values and being so driven by your values, because when you said that, it really became apparent and clear as to why I find what you do and the way you go about doing your work so inspiring. Because I think it's so clear in the work that you do that you truly are driven by a really strong, good set of values. There's often people within organizations who might be in the position of CEO or board members, and sometimes they don't act in the ways that in the best possible manner for community, for members of organizations. But when you've got
mm,
values driven CEO, a values driven leadership, a board that's functioning the way it needs to be, then the community in which it serves is going to be better off, right? And
absolutely.
I think it's clear anyone that knows you, I'm sure, would agree to what you just said about being driven by your values. What
Mm,
are your values? So when you sit down and ask yourself as a leader, I mean, what are those values in your leadership that truly drive you and determine your own decision making and leadership style?
yep. Uh, Great question. Easy one for me to answer because I've done all the homework on this one. I have three core values, and there are multiple ones that wrap around that. Curiosity is the first one, and that
Yep.
curiosity is to know more, understand more, and inquire. And I think that's why I've spent a lot of time in government. I was the leader for engagement, right? And then became very good at facilitating and mediating as well. So that value lived itself out very well in that context. But the other two, which I live by daily as well, courage,
Yes.
courage to um, be uncomfortable, courage to say no, and respect, right? So all of those things that we do um, are need to be done in a respectful manner, and that's respect for others, but also respect for myself and my family, and um, how I walk across the planet, frankly, in a way that is in keeping with doing the right thing. Um, that's my goal: is to do the right thing and achieve um, better than. So it's actually not about right and wrong. It's about better, not worse.
Yeah. Because often as being, being human, I honestly believe that part of being human is that perfection never truly exists. And
Mm,
so I think that this philosophy that you're sharing now about doing better and not necessarily being about right and wrong, but by being better, that sort of sits in line with the idea of perfection not really being attainable amongst humans. But at the same time, if I put the opposite view out there, I'm feeling that we can also have real positions of right and real positions of wrong. So, for example, if you speak about in the last 204 and almost 240 years, there's been some clear wrongs
mm,
in that time. So I think that the work you do in reconciliation is such a powerful place to be and a vital role to hold in community to be able to do right some of the
mm,
wrongs of the past. People probably think, hang on a second, what's a reconciliation guru like Jason Downs doing
mm.
on a negotiations podcast? And and
Well,
what do you reckon that is? What's the answer to that, Jason? How would we answer those people?
Matthew, there's about 10 questions there, and I want to answer each one of
All
them.
right, let's go.
But to answer the last one first, what am I doing on the podcast?
Yeah,
You very graciously and kindly offered me the opportunity to sit down and have a yarn with you, and
yeah,
I love having the conversations with people that um, are inquisitive by nature, because I learn
yeah,
right from these conversations more about myself and what's important to me. But I'll also learn from this conversation. Negotiation is like negotiation, reconciliation. You could put 100 people in a room and there would be 100 different answers to that same question,
Yeah.
um, because it means different things to different people.
Yes.
Um, so negotiation is an art form, right?
Hmm.
It's a dance of the language to understand, and who doesn't love that? It's just how we do it is the important part.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to pick up on your point about perfection there,
Yeah.
because for me that's a really interesting um, subject matter, and um, I think perfection is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yes.
And you started the podcast with a quote from Mandela, was it?
Yep.
Yep,
Yes. Yep.
yep. One of my favourite lines is in a Leonard Cohen song. You probably know it, um, and that is perfection. And his quote is, um, "Ring all the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering.
Yes.
Everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in."
Yes.
Right? I love that, because if we perfection's just non-existent. It's really up to us waking up and seeing a beautiful sunrise and thinking that's perfect,
Yes.
because it works for me.
Yes.
Um, I think if we try and struggle for perfection as individuals, we're kidding ourselves.
Yes.
Um, it's just about doing better. Um, and there's also a paradox in that, right? Because so the paradox is yes
Yes.
and it's the and that's worth chasing, right? And it's the and that's about negotiating, and it's the and that's about reconciliation.
Mm.
So that's what, back to values, that's what the curiosity, this lights me up, these conversations about how do we do better.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here, to talk to a man that knows more about negotiation than I do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think I'm also here to learn. In truth, I really am here to learn. I'm also here to learn from you, Jason, and I learn from every single guest that ever comes on the podcast. Something that I also have realized in this quest of learning that you speak about, because to me, learning is a really important part of life. So I share that with you. But something that I remember a few years ago, I was riding my push bike to work. Back then, I wasn't driving any car or anything. And actually, I know that
Mm.
you're a pretty keen push bike rider,
Oh,
Jason.
now you've got me. Now
Yeah.
you got me excited. Let's
So I
start
was,
talk cycling. Yep.
yeah, I was riding my push bike home from
Mm,
from work, and I was thinking, you know what? I've been a lawyer for back then it was more than 10 years, and I still have got so much
mm,
to learn. And then it came to me. I realized it. We're never going to become experts on anything. And even
mm,
somebody who works for 35, 40, 50 years, I've never reached that place. But
mm.
from what I know now, I can imagine that even if you spent so many years working in a particular field, understanding a particular art form, you're not the expert. The more you
Mm.
learn, the more you realize there is still to be learned.
Correct. Yep. Mate, some people never figure that one out, right? So well done for figuring that out at such a young age. Um, and I used to when I used to go and do talks in the first couple of months as a CEO, I would jokingly say to people, I've been in the job 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and I've still got my learner plate on, right? As in the
Yeah.
learner plate for driving. Um, and I still use that, and it's to that point of I will always continue to learn. Um, and look, it's a trite comment, but I think you're right. Anybody that says I'm an expert and there's nothing more to learn, I think they're the people that stop growing, right? And when you stop growing, you stop being better at your craft, whatever it is you choose in life. Um, and then your relevance is no longer as important.
Yeah.
So keep growing, keep learning. Like that's my view. That's what I say to my staff, to my kids. pick up a book, have a yarn, do some research, go for a walk, watch the sunrise. All those things matter in how we see things differently.
Yeah, and I remember when you first started in your role that at CEO, as
Yep.
CEO of Reconciliation South Australia. I remember catching up with you in the first few weeks of that new position, and
Mm,
I asked you something like, "How's it going?" And I remember so clearly your answer was something like, "Are you just learning what's going on?" So it's
yep.
testament.
Mm,
I've seen the actions of what you're speaking. So there's some great integrity in the words that you're speaking as well. And to add also a little bit into the question that I put before, what's an amazing leader who works in the area of reconciliation? Well, I mean, what's somebody like that doing on a negotiation podcast? I just want to also give into this, which is
yep.
because rolling through negotiations is about bringing great people together, sharing so we can all become stronger in our negotiation skill sets. It's also about having great people connecting, people
Mm,
from jiu-jitsu community, First Nations community, and just great people who love to be a part of the negotiation skill set. Beyond this, I feel that there's
mm,
some similarities in what it would take to be a great negotiator and some similarities in what it would take to successfully achieve reconciliation. So one of the first things people talk about when negotiating, even if I start from this place, right, I often speak about the inner game of negotiations. And the
yeah.
inner game of negotiations is all about how do we think? What's our mindset? How have we prepared ourselves mentally, spiritually, physically to step into the negotiation environment before the
Mm,
negotiation even really begins? It begins within ourselves.
mm,
I'm thinking out loud here, but I'm wondering also whether we could say that from the reconciliation perspective. Before we bring different people from different cultures together, I wonder whether it begins with those different people really understanding who they are, where they belong, what the interests are, and coming together from a place of fullness, spiritually, mentally, physically, to then begin the reconciliation process
yeah.
from there.
Yeah. Um, that's a really interesting perspective, I think, Matthew. And I'm sure that your listeners and even you would be of the view that the best negotiations, the best outcomes are done with people who have a good worldview and a solid reference and frame of mind to be confident in where they're at. And there's a difference between being confident and arrogant, isn't there? Um, I would say that from my perspective, and certainly I did a bit of work in the facilitation and in the mediation world when I was working for SA government,
Yeah.
and where it would always get sticky um, is where people were coming um, from a fixed mindset, right? And that
Mm,
is, I am the expert. I've been to university, or I've been in this game for 30 years. I know everything.
mm,
Therefore, if I shout louder, or I stand up, or I wave my arms, or I use technical terms, I'll be better and I'll win. Um, and if I marry that up against 10 years that I worked for the Aboriginal Lands Trust from the mid 90s on, I would go out onto country and sit down on community with elders, with kings and queens, right, of country, and the approach was never that. The
mm.
approach was gentle. The approach was we have to work with and find that way forward. And I think I learnt some of my best life lessons sitting under gum trees with dogs crawling all over me or flies buzzing around my face. Just slowing down and taking the time to listen and understand from a different worldview.
Yes.
Um, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this amazing lady. There's a lovely lady from Dharawal country, right, New South Wales. Lady's name's Auntie Frances Bodkin,
Hmm.
and she's a professor and she's very academic. She shared some information that I love around the five truths, which just resonated so well with me around engagement
Yeah.
and that whole facilitation, mediation, and it's publicly available. And and the five truths are very simple but very effective. And that is, to your point, um, first of all, you've got to know your own worldview. You've got to know who you are, what you stand for, where you come from, and have that confidence that you know everything. The second is to understand the other person's worldview, right?
Yes.
And you can't do that unless you're listening. Then the third thing is to have that shared worldview, right? Which means you've got to have conversations. You've got to communicate. You've got to engage. You've got to be respectful. You've got to have time. You've got to be curious. Um, the fourth of the five truths is to understand that everything has a history,
Yes.
right? And that history is, as you pointed out, not always good, right? It comes to truth telling, which is part of reconciliation. And the fifth and the final truth, which she talks about, is that everything has a consequence. So every decision that we do or don't make has a consequence. And what I love about those five trees is that helps so good in the world of doing good stakeholder engagement, which is where I spent a significant portion of my time in government trying to steer policy and economic participation with First Nations people in the right direction. Um, that sometimes worked, sometimes it didn't.
Mm.
But I love her work. I love those five truths. And what I love even more about those five truths is that we can all relate to it. Um, and it's beautifully wrapped around a 65,000-year-old culture.
And they are beautiful. And thanks so much for sharing the five truths. Can you say the auntie's name again that shared these
Yeah,
with you?
yeah, I can. And I think I'm just looking around my study here because I do have her book somewhere on my bookcase, which no one can see. But trust me, I have a bookcase.
Yeah. No, actually we,
Um,
we can see a bookcase in the background there.
oh, you can see it.
Yeah.
Right. Auntie, so Frances Bodkin,
By Auntie Frances
her name,
Bodkin
from Dharawal.
from Dharawal. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're great. So anybody that wants to learn more about these five truths, they could probably find some information.
Now, Matthew, are we, so are you telling me that people can actually see as well as hear me?
Yeah, so people can see you. You're looking sharp and deadly as always, Jason, and you've
Oh,
got
Matthew,
your
thank you.
bookcase in the background, which looks
Right.
great. And
I
when
sh
we first connected, I saw that and I thought, man, what a great, amazing background. Because
There are some stories in my background, I can promise you that. Some we'll talk about and some maybe not. But yeah, good to know.
when you look at your bookshelves, you've got a lot of books there.
Yep,
Is and you've probably got more than one favorite. But is there
yep.
one of your favorites that pops out and comes to mind as being a great book?
Ooh. Look, um, yeah, there's a couple, Matthew. I am a huge fan of Brene Brown.
Yep.
And if your listeners don't know who she is, I would highly recommend listening to or reading her books. She is a leader that talks about vulnerability.
Yes.
Um, so I love her work. Uh, and not necessarily a favorite, but a book that really has etched itself into the fabric of some of my thinking is not a good book to read, and it's one that some people will be familiar with. It's called Blood on the Wattle,
Hmm.
right? Some of you people may have read it, by Bruce Elder. Okay,
Beautiful.
it is literally massacres and maltreatment of Aboriginal Australians, and it's a hard, dark, honest book to read. And it's a book that took me 5 years to read, okay, because I would read a passage or a paragraph and then have to put it away and process. But it's honest, and it's the truth. And until we get to the truth of the history of colonization and unpack it in all its forms and then process intergenerational trauma that is a result of that, we're not really going to get to the depths of genuine, authentic reconciliation, are we?
We're not. And thanks a lot also for sharing that book, Blood in the
Mm,
Wattle. And
mm,
it's interesting when you shared it, my reaction was beautiful. And the cover, it does look dark. It's in the dark, dark brown and dark sort of
mm.
red colors. And obviously you said it took you a long time to read because of the depth and darkness and the truth within that book. Is there any beauty in the truth? Maybe the beauty is in the
Mm.
fact that the truth can lead to reconciliation.
Um, it's the book. It's a book I've read once and put it
Yeah.
away and kept on my shelf.
Yeah.
Um, where's the beauty? Because there's beauty in everything, right? I think the beauty for me is in the resilience of
Mm,
people, First Nations people that have survived that.
mm,
And um, one of the things that just warms me on a regular basis is the grace and the dignity um, of the people that I get to that choose to work with me,
yeah.
um, who, despite those stories and despite the brutality of colonization and the things that happened, and despite the racism that is with us today and the institutional um, construct that creates problems, despite all of that, there's beauty in some of the sweetest, loveliest people that I've ever met that
Mm,
um, that want for better um, and do it with such grace and humour. That's the beauty for me.
yeah.
I love that, and that's why I love my work. It's somebody asked me the other day, "What's it like being a CEO?" 2 words: tiring, but I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a privileged role, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah. Um, Brother David Mayo and I, we created the Black Excellence in Indigenous Governance program a few years ago. And Dave's going to
Yep,
come on as a guest soon. We're going to speak about our program. But one
amazing.
of the things that we talk about as well is the roles and responsibilities of the CEO, the roles and responsibility of board members. So, considering you're a really good example of a CEO, I'd love to be able to ask you, how would you explain it? I mean, how would you explain somebody that is a really good CEO and someone that's perhaps not a very good CEO? Or if someone is an average CEO and they're listening now and they want to be able to learn how to become a great CEO, what are the things that need to happen
Mm.
to achieve that position of being a great CEO?
Yeah, so it's a lovely question to ask me. I've been in the job a year, mate. So I'm still I'm still learning. I said to you, I'm still learning. How do I survive being a CEO?
Hmm.
Um, I think it's a question that I've really reflected on a lot in the last month because of Reconciliation Week.
Yeah.
Um, I think you've got to have your feet firmly on the ground and not be distracted by everyone else's um, direction or misdirection.
Yes.
You've got to have a good radar to be able to distinguish between the two. But so to your question, what makes a good CEO for me? It is somebody that does have their their hand on their heart and says, "Well, this is what I stand for, and these are my values." Um, but you've also got to honour the position and the organisation that you work for.
Mm.
And there are times where you have to make calls about good governance and doing the right thing around governance, because if you get that wrong, um, then things can unravel very quickly.
Yes.
So if you don't know all of the things that are necessary, and hand on heart again, I came into the role as CEO and didn't know half the things I needed to know. I think one of the secrets for me is knowing what you do, knowing what you don't, and then surrounding yourself or finding people that do have the answers that you can trust, um, to work with you. And teams is a really interesting term. That I have a team and a staff of 6 now, and they're all incredible at their
Yeah.
job. Um, but I also rely on experts from outside of the organisation as well in
Mm.
that governance context to make sure that we function well. Um,
Mm.
it's a critical step, but health and well-being's packed in there as well, mate. It took me a little while to figure this one out, that um, working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week doesn't make you a good CEO.
Mm.
Um, you've got to find the balance that works for you in the rhythm of your week, your month, and your year. And there will be times where they will fluctuate. So reconciliation week was the week where everything else comes, well, almost everything else comes secondary
Mhm.
to being in that space. But either side of that, you've got to find um, that rhythm that works for you. To use a cycling term, there's a cadence that you need to maintain for good health and good well-being. And I guess it's interesting. I didn't really start to figure that part out until 11 months in,
Mm.
and um, I I gave myself a break and I did what I really love doing. I combined three passions of mine: um, learning more about First Nations culture, um, being out on country, and riding my push bike. And I rode from Adelaide to Blinman on the Mawsons Trail, which
Wow.
takes you um, 13 days if you're a good
Yeah.
bike rider.
That's amazing.
That was 917 kilometres, mate. And I rode out of Ghana through Paramank into Nadjeri, Nookanoe, and finished up in Adnyamathanha country. And I loved every day of it. Um, and that really gave me some perspective on being a good leader. Um, and obviously, I did, work at night and emails and stuff. Um, but it just helped me to really understand that it's not about working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Um, you're no good to yourself, you're no good to your team, you're no good to the organisation if you don't have wellness in your life.
Yeah,
And that's health as well as spiritual wellness.
absolutely. And it's also another great example of the point we were speaking about before, which is that what I was calling the inner game, but that inner peace, inner
Yep,
resolve.
yep.
And I feel like sometimes if we're out there working 60 hours or more per week, if we're not careful, we can soon become empty on
Mm,
the inside. And so then they become empty hours. And an organization is much better placed if it's led by a full,
mm,
spiritually well,
yep.
healthy leader as opposed to somebody that is just burning those cylinders. And I love the cycling.
So
Also, I love
do
the
I.
fact that you're able to yeah, you're able to bring in some cycling to the conversation. That's really cool. And
Yeah.
the principle about cadence and cycling. Because
Mm.
people do speak about, oh, you have to have work-life balance, right? It's one of those cliche
Ooh,
words that everyone
yeah,
wants to speak
okay.
about.
I'm going to pull you up right
Let's
there,
go. Yeah.
handbrake that.
Okay, let's handbrake it.
Um, the work-life balance for me is actually part of that perfection that you spoke about earlier.
Hmm.
Um, and I would challenge anybody now that said, "Oh, work-life balance, you've got to have that right." And just if you love what you do,
Yeah.
if you genuinely are in a good space and a good place, then it's life balance, right?
Mm.
That's probably a little bit deeper than normal, but um, if you don't enjoy your work, then you got to understand why that is, and then
Yes.
figure out what kind of life you want to lead on this planet. Um, so it took me a lot of years to figure out that it's less about work-life balance and more about life balance.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. So it does, but can you explain a little bit more? Because I don't know if I'm giving, if I'm hearing what you're saying fully in the way that you're saying it, or if I'm applying some sort of own biases into what you're saying. So yeah, so you're saying if you love the work that you do, then it becomes about life balance. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Does that mean that life or work becomes your life? I mean, can you explain that a little bit more?
I think the trap is if work becomes your life, then y- y- you're not really honoring the human spirit,
Mm.
um, in as much as we why we exist, and that is to create, um, or what we're here for, and that's very deep.
Yeah.
In terms of my sort of interpretation on work-life balance, look, I worked for a long time with people that would do 12-hour days and then come in on a Monday and complain they had to work on the weekend and they missed out on their kids' football or netball, and couldn't go on a holiday with them during the school holidays. And it just really, over time, made me think about what is important. And you hear people every now and then say, if you can turn up to work and get paid for what brings you joy in life, then it doesn't necessarily have that same burden with it.
Yes.
It's something you want to do, somewhere you want to be, you're just getting paid for it. Um, and again, it comes back to values, right? So if you're not happy in work, then I'd urge anybody to really start to dig into why. Why am I showing up every day? Why am I dragging myself out of bed? Why am I being shouted at or not being appreciated or valued? Why am I not happy? So it's that life balance is that, what we do in life should nurture and bring us joy. The money should be the bonus.
Yes.
And
So
maybe that's very simplistic, but it works for me.
I think you're spot on in what you're saying. I remember once as a young boy, my father giving me a metaphor. He was talking about a tennis player, and he said, imagine you get somebody like Leighton Hewitt, who's on the court
Mm.
10 hours, 12 hours a day as a young kid, doesn't want to put the tennis racket down, continuously playing tennis, loving it. Through the love of the game, he's going to get better and better and better. And then as he gets better through the love and passion that he holds, people are going to pay him more for the value that he can bring. And I wonder if that story is part of what you're saying. Because if you get somebody who's chasing the big dollars as a tennis player but doesn't like the game of tennis to begin with, they're never really going to get very good at that sport.
Mm.
Money is a very shallow purpose and a very shallow motivator. But if we can find work that is fulfilling for us, is something that we believe in, if we're really making a difference, something bigger and more purposeful beyond ourselves, then we can be driven, inspired, and encouraged through
Mm.
that work, we achieve amazing outcomes for families, for communities. And then through that, if we're in the right place, if we're working aligned with our values through that service, we can find great joy. Is that part of what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely, mate. Look, far be it from me to be diminishing anybody that's um, chasing a career to be a millionaire. If that is an end to a mean and it's a goal, and it's brings them joy, then good-o. Um, I guess I chase the different sort of goals in life, and that is around fulfillment, joy, um, and as I said at the start, creating better um, works for me.
Mm.
But it's not going to work for everyone, right? Everyone's different, and our life circumstances are different, um, and it's not always possible. Um, there was a period in time where, when you're a dad and you've got three young children, you've got to put food on the table. You've got to sometimes be really challenged and compromise those values. But I would never sell out on them. And, it's only now I'm starting to understand some of the decisions that I made consciously were essentially made on a values perspective. And there are a number of jobs that I passed up and said no to in government.
Mm.
Um, because it wasn't right for me. And it wasn't right for me because the project that was on the table didn't fit with my values.
Yeah, beautiful. And then that's led you to be working in a way that you're so fulfilled
Mm.
in the work
Yep.
that you do.
Sometimes saying no is actually a really powerful um, position. And I don't know, maybe it took me almost 30 years in some ways to figure that out. But how does that work from a negotiation perspective where you're across the table and someone just says no? What does that do for you?
Well, I think it's like this, Jason. I feel like if somebody's saying no to you across the negotiation table, I think that you got to take the step back as well. So when you negotiate from the place of being that person who isn't just about the dollars at the end of the negotiated deal, but is about the deeper meaning, is about really the essence of the honor, the human spirit, the fulfillment, the joy that you're speaking about that drives you to that negotiation
Mm,
table in the first place. And I mean, even if you think about a simple, maybe it's not simple, but it's a common form of negotiation that's very serious in a lot of people's lives. Just say you're negotiating a new home that you want to buy for your family.
mm,
And you get there with the agent, if it's a private negotiation type scenario, and you get down to the point of dollars and price. And people could think, hang on a second, but what's that at all got to do with the human spirit, the fulfillment and joy? It's either about the taking the, 800,000 or whatever, or they're not. It's about the dollars. But if you really look beyond that, it's still about the fulfillment of the human spirit, the joy, the connectedness, because probably what you're
mm,
doing is buying a home for your family. And if that's what you're doing, you can realize that the love of your family can be anywhere, whether or not you make this purchase. And so I think that that's where the principles you've been sharing can apply to negotiations, where we understand beyond the transaction, but to this deeper, meaningful purpose. I think it can give us great strength in the negotiation context because we're not hung up on the one deal, but instead we're in line with the deep truth of the purpose. Jason, I wouldn't be doing my
totally.
job. Awesome. I'm glad to hear your agreement on that one, brother.
No,
Jason,
I'm processing what you're saying, and I'm looking for something I wrote down because you've reminded me of something. But keep going.
well, I will. And when you find what you've written down, I would love to hear you share it. I feel like I wouldn't be
Yep.
doing my job properly if I didn't uh, uh, ask you a couple of questions. One of those
Yep.
questions might be on the tip of a lot of people's tongues, and it is, um, what's reconciliation all about, and what is Reconciliation Week that we've just had?
Hmm. Hmm. So let's break that down. What is reconciliation?
Yeah.
Um, there are multiple ways to answer that. And, I can give you the Reconciliation South Australia definition, and that is that, what we're trying to do is to create meaningful and lasting reconciliation for all South Australians. And that means walking side by side with First Nations people, right?
Mm.
So it's about achieving an understanding and a balance.
Yes.
To do that, you have to come from a good place. I could sit in a room full of accountants and they'd say, well, reconciliation is about balance. Yep,
Yeah. Yes.
making sure the books balance. I looked up uh, the etymology of the word reconciliation, and it breaks down to reconcile, and it comes from I think it's from a Greek word from memory, that essentially means again,
Hmm.
right? Again. Um, and what I like about that is that um, we have relationships that are broken, or relationships that are out of balance, or we have relationships where there is too much power in one side. And if you're in a relationship with a partner in life, you don't want any of those things. You want to be equal.
Mm.
So for me, um, reconciliation is that goal of creating a better society where there is balance, where there is equal opportunity, you know, fair justice. Um, but inside of all of that comes that that acknowledgement of the past and the history. There are 5 dimensions that Reconciliation Australia talks about that we use in our conversations, and those 5 dimensions are unity,
Yep.
uh, institutional integrity,
Yes.
speaks to governance,
Yep.
um, historical acceptance, uh, race relations,
Yep.
and importantly, equity and equality. Right, so they are the 5 dimensions of reconciliation.
Can
And
you say those five just
say them again.
yeah.
Hmm?
So
I thought I did well to remember them off the top of my
you
hat
did
for an
so well, and
afternoon.
I just want to write them down as you say them because they're just
Yeah.
to make sure.
Which
And
ones did you get,
I
Matthew?
got unity,
Yep.
institutional integrity, historical
Yeah.
acceptance, race relations. So what's that? One, two,
Race
three,
relations, that's 4.
four.
And
Yeah,
the last one is equity and equality.
awesome.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing these
That's quite all right.
5 dimensions. And
There's so much to
if they're
unpack
done
in
right, they're
those.
so powerful, right? If they are done right.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. And I think that's where our concentration needs to go as an organisation, into honouring those definitions and into um, doing them properly. Uh,
Yeah.
the challenge that we have, the challenge that I have as a CEO, is one that other not-for-profits have, I'm sure, and that is, you know, let me quote the Mad Hatter, right,
Yep.
from Alice in Wonderland.
Yep.
We have so much to do and so little time,
Yeah.
therefore we must go slowly, right?
Yeah.
If we rush this, people will not value it,
Yeah.
right? And what I've been saying to the team for the last couple of months and now to our members and stakeholders is, let's honour and value that word and the conversations that are needed to be had, right? And I don't mean from a dollar perspective. I mean deeply value reconciliation, and that means unpacking those 5 dimensions.
Yes.
And that means being curious. It means being courageous and sitting. And this is something that we don't learn as young people. We don't, well, some do, some don't. We don't learn to sit in uncomfortable very well.
Yes.
And uncomfortable is where you are out of your comfort zone and in your learning zone. And it is so important that we figure out how to hold people in that space of uncomfortable and
Yeah.
be curious and inquire. And it's the same with negotiations. You know, you've got to take people out of their little comfort zones into that space of awkwardness or uncomfortability to understand that their position may not be as well as informed as they first thought. And what we're trying to do is not place judgment on people. Because the moment you do that, you've lost the point, right? You've gone from that equity and equality, and it's a power game, and so
Mm.
it becomes you're right, I'm wrong. The moment we start doing that, it's it's um it's very binary, and it can't be that. We're complicated as people. This is a a subject matter that won't and shouldn't go away. And our role as an organisation is to hold that space. And what I'd love for your listeners to do is, if they're curious about the historical acceptance part,
Yeah.
Adelaide University just did a great piece of work, which is now on our website and their website, around frontier violence.
Okay.
And they've developed an amazing tool that you can log into, and you can look at the colonial impacts of South Australia pre-1901. They've got
Yeah.
all the data, all the evidence, all the archives, all the records, and you can click on a dot in South Australia, and there are lots of dots, for obvious reasons, and learn a little bit about the historical acceptance of what went on. And this is just pre-1901.
Yeah.
We see it as
That's
a great
great
way of truth
research.
telling.
Yeah.
And that the team has done an amazing job, and we're fortunate to be partners in that.
Maybe what we can do, Jason, as well, maybe we can share the link, that research
Yep.
in the description for this podcast episode. So anybody that's listening to this podcast
Would be
episode,
great.
go
Yeah, it would be
click
really
on the
great.
link
Yep.
that's in the description, and that can take you into that research. So
Yep. Now I need to just check in with you as a master sort of negotiator here. Did I answer your question properly? Did I hit the mark on that one
well,
for you?
first up, Jason, um, I think we're all in the spirit of learning, like you say.
Mm,
So I don't know. I don't call myself a master negotiator. I call myself a learning negotiator, like
okay.
many other people. But the other point on that
And
is
I'll
that
call myself the learning CEO.
yeah,
Yep.
the other point on that is that I think you definitely did answer the question, and I appreciated the personal perspective you went through in that answer. I also appreciate your sharing of the five dimensions, as
Mm,
well as something else that you shared. And I began this podcast speaking about the inspiration that you bring. And you also shared about the ability to be vulnerable to learn.
yeah.
And I feel like a lot of racism probably comes, and I say probably because I'm not an expert when it comes to racism, but I feel like a lot of racism probably comes from ignorance and biased judgments without understanding.
Mm,
And
mm,
I feel like if we can put ourselves in the position like you did in your journey and your story of going out onto country with elders and sitting in vulnerability and listening, and perhaps even at some stage sitting down there and saying, do you know what? I don't know, but I'd love to learn, and being vulnerable in
mm.
that journey. I believe that that level of vulnerability that you shared is something that can be very inspiring for many people. And it's probably in the
That's the key,
pathway.
Matthew. So I just want to pick you up because that's the key for me.
Mm,
Um, is sitting down with mob, with community, with elders, and listening and saying, I don't know.
Mm.
You know, the technical term is appreciative inquiry, right? Um, tell me more. And as somebody that spent a lot of time facilitating in the corporate world and in the political and the bureaucratic world, one of my favorite questions, um, I'm giving away a trade secret here as a facilitator,
Yeah.
was help me to understand,
Yes.
right? Because the minute you do that, the minute you say to someone, help me to understand what you're saying or why that's important, there is a subconscious shift in the brain and in the thinking where the person will go from telling you you're wrong or telling you that they're right. There will be a shift to, I'm going to educate and I'm going to help you to
Yes.
understand. Um, there's an art to that, but I can advocate till till cows come home that is a pathway that opens more doors than you could possibly imagine, and that's that curious nature that exists in me. Just
Mm.
help me to understand,
Yes.
because
And
there's no judgment in it either, is there?
that's right. And it also shows the confidence that you were speaking of rather than the arrogance. Because the arrogant
Yep.
person would be, oh, yeah, I know it all, so listen up. A confident person
Mm,
is able to safely say, help me to understand as you speak.
yep.
And that then also touches the human empathetic heart, doesn't it? And people then want to help you on that journey of understanding. So
Yep.
I appreciate, I'm going to take note of that
Vulnerability at
tip.
best,
I'll
mate.
take note of that tip of facilitators. Help
Yep.
me to
Help me to
understand.
understand. Yeah, yeah. And I got to promise you, it works really well with your partner in life too, right? If
Mm,
you've had a crappy day or they've had a crappy day and you're sitting down and you know that something's not right. How was your day? Not good. Well, tell me about it. Help me to understand why it wasn't good.
I love this, Jason. I didn't
Give
I
it a
didn't
crack.
think I didn't think we'd be getting marriage tips on our negotiation podcast, but I'm going to use that one myself, you know? Yeah.
Matthew, so far so good for me. I think I've been married, what, 25 years? Yeah.
Oh, great.
So far so good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm going to use that one. I might use that one tonight to help me to understand.
Have it a crack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Have a crack soon.
Jason, I definitely will. I love it. I really do love that. I was joking when I was speaking about marriage, but I can also feel because there's a lot of love in that question, and
Yeah, there is.
yeah, I think
Yep.
it's a beautiful question to ask.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yep. That pleasure. Thank you.
The other
I
piece I
wanted
need to
just,
ask,
yeah,
sorry,
go on.
no, you finished what you're saying. Sorry.
I just wanted to circle back to the other comment you made before about racism,
Mhm.
right? Um, it's a dark tunnel, but it's incumbent on all of us as leaders um, to shine a light on it, um, and shine a light on it without judgment. But most people that, when they start talking about racism, talk about it um, with either judgment or they weaponize the word.
Yeah.
And they weaponize that word with aggression. And the moment you do that, that is the moment you put the person that you're talking to um, into a position. And as a negotiator, the last thing you want to do is put someone in an unwinnable position, right?
Yes.
Um, so, whilst this may sound soft and disingenuous, I think for me, the approach that I take is not to judge, but to have a
Yes.
conversation about racism. And yes, I I think racism has layers to it. I think there is ignorance sometimes.
Mhm.
I think there is arrogance sometimes, and I think there is um, deliberate, intentional racism, which is the worst and the most unpalatable. But if we put everyone in that same box, then how do you help that person to see that there is a better way, that there is learning to be had?
Yeah.
And I've literally in the last month gone out to a local government region and had conversations with elected members who felt emboldened by the referendum to say, well, we don't need to do acknowledgement to countries anymore. That stuff's old, it's boring, it's repetitive, it's ridiculous. Like, these are the things that I heard after 3 hours of some respectful conversations that weren't laden with judgment or accusation, but more about education and understanding.
Yeah.
We shifted that perspective
That's great.
in a positive way. So
That'd
it's,
be a tough environment
for me, that
to
works.
be in. That'd be a very tough
Oh, it was a long
environment to
drive
be in.
home,
Yeah.
but I was exhausted by the end of it. But
Yeah.
what a to where we started, Matthew. What a great thing to be able to do to help somebody realise that um, that there's more to learn, there's more to grow, and there's greater benefit and opportunity from a deeper understanding than having a lockdown informed, you're wrong, I'm right position.
Yeah.
So you were going to ask me a question before.
I was, but
Thrown you.
I
Sorry.
also want to give into the point you make because the story that you shared and the point that you make, I think, is a deep one. And it's sort of reflecting on what you shared as well. And I feel that often it's the intention of the behavior or the intention of what is
Mm,
spoken or the intention of what is done. And even when we look at things like an acknowledgement to country, sometimes organizations can make the mistake of just getting it done to not do the wrong thing. But
mm,
if an acknowledgement is given or a welcome to country is embraced and appreciated with the right intention, that spirit of appreciation, then I feel like there's a lot greater weight in in it for all that are participating. So I feel like the intention, the purpose, the reason why we're doing, the
mm.
reason why we're part of, I believe are powerful when it comes to appreciating First Nations culture or people being part of an acknowledgement or a welcome.
Look, absolutely, and I would be more than confident that you and most, if not all, your listeners would have sat in a workshop or a meeting or some presentation and had somebody come up at the start of the event and do a very disingenuous acknowledgement to country.
Mm.
Um, and rightly or wrongly, I'm now saying to people, if you're going to do it authentically or
Yes.
don't do it at all,
Yes.
right? And I know that I've had community mobs say exactly the same to me, so I
Yes.
say that with a degree of comfortability, because who wants the disingenuous?
Exactly.
It's revealing in itself, right?
And it
So
is disrespectful.
let's totally.
Yeah.
So let's get away from it. Either say it and mean it and do it properly, or don't do it at all. But if you're not doing it at all, then you're missing the point,
Yes.
right? So learn a little bit about what an acknowledgement means and why it's important, and see it as the value add and see it as the opportunity to engage at a much deeper and respectful level.
Absolutely. And what well said,
Yeah,
Jason.
thanks you.
I have another question, which is one that I'll go back to before, which was about Reconciliation Week. And I just feel that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing my job in hosting this podcast if I didn't at least have the space to hear your answer. And the question is, what's Reconciliation Week all about?
Well, thank you. Good job. So Reconciliation Week marks two very significant dates in our colonial history
Mhm.
of Australia, and that is um, May the 27th, which was the date in which the referendum of 1967 was successful
Yes.
in in embracing and acknowledging First Nations people. I mean, that was a watershed moment. It took quite a long time to get there, but we got there on that level. And that's a day worth celebrating forever. June the 3rd, which is exactly 1 week later, was a watershed moment in our country's history. And I don't think people fully value that watershed moment. So June the 3rd, in some places, is also known as Mabo Day,
Yes.
in which the High Court of Australia handed down a decision that terra nullius was void. Well, I think that's the correct term. So Captain Cook's interpretation of how things were when he landed was incorrect,
Yes.
and it took a long time. But when you talk about leaders, what an absolute legend of a man, Eddie Mabo,
Yes.
to hold the Australian and the English government to account by their own rules and have that legal term nullified. It's a day that is remarkable in our colonial history that is worth acknowledging. And as an organisation, we acknowledge both of those days and everything in between,
Beautiful.
which is a
And
massive week for people.
yeah, beautiful. And thank you for that great explanation. And I feel that you also do a lot of work in that for all people in community, First Nations peoples and non-First Nations peoples, to come together in appreciation for
Yeah,
what the week is about as well.
totally, absolutely.
Jason, we've reached this point in time, and it's almost I feel like in this instance it's an anticlimax after you speak about the significance of the
Mhm.
events and those dates in Reconciliation Week. So
Yeah,
I'm going to try and segue this if we can. We've
sure.
reached the point in time where we give our listeners three great takeaway tips that they can actually use as takeaway points to help them in their own negotiations.
Yep.
The first one of the, and this is actually based on what
Mm,
you've been sharing, right? So if I don't get it word for word, please forgive me. It's a bit of a summary, but I'll do my best to keep the essence and meaning of what you shared. This is the segue point that I'm touching with first, because the first point I think is of great power is in the five truths that you shared and the education by Auntie Frances Bodkin. And when we speak the five truths, the reason why I see that as a segue point is because Eddie Mabo, in his overcoming of perhaps the nation's biggest fraud of terra nullius,
mm,
what Eddie Mabo did was achieve truth.
mm,
The five truths as you shared is knowing your worldview, understanding theirs, having a shared worldview, understanding everything has a history and everything has a consequence. Within that is those beautiful words that you speak that I'll be using tonight with my wife. Help me to understand. Beautiful words. And I
mm,
feel like that question, that request, that asking, help me to understand. For some reason, I feel in my gut that it sits in with the five truths.
mm,
Second takeaway point you shared was about your values. And I think it's beautiful that you can speak your values so clearly. You can articulate your values. Your values are your purpose, and they are so clear in everything that you do. And so, if we understand what our values are, they'll definitely help us as guideposts, as rudders on a ship, as the light of the lighthouse. That knowing our values will steer us in the right direction. And so, for your values, Jason, that you shared, being curious, you were saying that courage is a value of yours, respect and learning being a value of yours.
mm,
But I think that the real point for our listeners is understanding what your values are and using your values to steer you in the right direction. A third takeaway point I feel that you so powerfully spoke and shared is about balance. And you referred at one point to cadence and cycling. So I can even imagine when you push the pedal on a push bike, you're giving that push, which creates momentum, but you're only ever going to push per revolution or per number of cycles. You don't push consistently on that push bike. And that in itself creates balance. So there's not always going to be perfection in the balance, but balance, as Jason, as you spoke so well, is about the life balance. It's about honoring the human spirit, having that level of fulfillment, joy, clarity to create better outcomes for ourselves, for our families, for communities, for all other people in that deeper meaning of the human spirit that is life. So the balance point, I believe, is so powerful when we're negotiating. If we can keep this
Mm.
perspective of human spirit in mind, that's a great and powerful way to be able to see further and deeper into what a negotiation is all about. And that's going to give us power in the negotiation context for the greater good. Jason, do you have any final parting words of wisdom to leave our listeners with?
Matthew, I think you summed it up very, very well. Man, we covered a lot in an hour.
We did cover a lot in an
Um,
hour.
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember I'd love to ask you as well, did the time fly? Because at the start I said to you, I think time's going to fly for you. You're going to enjoy it.
Time's going to fly.
Awesome.
Absolutely. If
Awesome.
I'm just going to perhaps leave you with this one,
Yep.
and your listeners with this one, just that last word, that last comment you said. Um, I think what I've learned over my career, and I reflect a lot on maybe half a dozen key Aboriginal elders that came into my life at the right point in my life, most of whom have sadly passed away. But I carry their wisdom in my life and my thinking. Um, so it's not power over, it's power with
Mm,
that's important to me.
yes.
I think if we go through, if the people that we engage with are aiming for that power over, then I'm not necessarily sure they're people I want to be engaging with.
Yes.
So it's power with and power on that equal footing that kind of lights me up.
Beautiful. Jason, I have learned so much from this episode and what you've been able to share with us today. It's been really amazing being able to connect with you like this. And thank you so much for being part of Rolling Through Negotiations podcast. I'm sure you're going to keep on doing the great work that you do. I look forward to connecting with you sometime soon. And yeah, it's been wonderful, and there's so much to reflect on and learn in what you've shared today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. It's been absolute joy. Honestly, I've appreciated it a lot. Thank you, and all
Awesome.
the best.
And guys, if you've enjoyed this episode of Rolling Through Negotiations podcast, make sure you support the show, subscribe, and be the first to know each and every single Thursday when a new episode comes out. Puss.